All right, we're on those numbers, also on those dissipating crowds right now in Grayson, Kentucky, where you have heard by now that Kim Davis is not going down without a fight. 6 days in jail, this Kentucky clerk has decided that she might have a different interpretation of what some judges told her to do than what they thought they told her to do. The bottom line is this has become a cause celeb, and one that at least former Virginia Governor George Davis Georgiana, I should say, is not a fan of, telling me on FBN this could be a very slippery slope for her and the party. Listen.
Comply, and it's not an exception to it. If she didn't want to do it, have one of her deputy clerks do it. But you cannot ignore the Supreme Court decision, whether you like it or not. And you've sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution and administer the law.
All right. In other words, no matter your personal views, especially if you're in a position of administering a constitutional duty in your office, it is not worth sort of fighting the Supreme Court on the law of the land. That is a view that has been echoed by no less than high-rising presidential candidate, Ohio Governor John Kasich. He will be joining us later this hour while he commends the personal beliefs that Ms. Davis brings to this issue, that it is the law of the land and it's time to move on. Now to Kayleigh McEnany on how this issue could be impacting this race. Kayleigh, it comes at a time Republicans like to get issues like these kind of off the table so they can focus on some of the substantive economic ones they think are going to be their bread and butter in a General Electric. What do you make of that?
You know, Republicans would be really unwise to ignore traditional values which really undergird the Republican Party. You know, a lot has been made of the fact that more than 50% of the nation supports same-sex marriage. That's true. 41%, though, Neil, disagree with the Supreme Court ruling. That's a huge contingency. And leading up to this ruling, a majority of the nation still supported the state's rights to choose. So there's a strong contingency that agrees with Kim Davis and that doesn't agree with same-sex marriage. And the Republican Party would be very unwise to ignore that.
All right, but then there is this thing of, balance of power and the three branches of government and the Supreme Court, say what you will of 5 justices. I think what the Kasichs and some of these others are saying, even George Allen, is it's the law of the land. It is what it is. Personal grievances notwithstanding. You have to honor that law, especially if you are, a duly appointed law officer of the United States government and sworn to uphold the very Constitution you're ignoring today.
Neil, there's no doubt about that. Look, Kim Davis took an oath of office. She swore to uphold the laws of the United States, and as such, she had to implement them as the Supreme Court articulated them. That being said, Republicans, by and large, are worried that the next logical step is going to happen. It's what Roberts warned about in his dissent. You're going to see the mosque, the synagogue, and the church forced to issue marriage licenses or lose their tax-exempt status. That's a problem, Neil, and that's what Republicans are very worried about.
All right, now, as someone who knows law pretty well, and I'm just wondering where this goes, okay, because you could make an argument, personal others, there's so many rulings, abortion chief among them, and of course there are a lot of people who will not adhere to that, or those who were there at hospitals or institutions that honor the practice of abortion, they opt out for religious reasons, and through this whole period they have been given special room to do so. This might be a different case though, right?
It's a very different case. Look, when you enter into the private sector, when you force the hand of the baker, when you force the hand of the florist to engage in something that is directly contrary to their religious beliefs,
but
that is
unacceptable.
This is
not a baker or a florist here. I mean, this is someone who administers marriage licenses and knows that with that position comes a certain responsibility to issue the law of the land. So that's where I kind of draw a distinction. What about you?
Yes. And that's the nuance, Neil. You hit the nail on the head right there. When you're a public official, elected, sworn to uphold the laws of the United States, you have to do that. Kim Davis had to issue those licenses. But when you are you're in the private sector, you're a private entity, you're a religious institution, you're a church, that's where the government cannot force your hand. But that's the next step. Mark my words, you're going to see that next, and it's a big problem. And I'm glad Mike Huckabee is bringing this to light and bringing important acknowledgement to this issue.
All right. Well, whatever your views are on this subject, and Kelly, I want to thank you. Mike Huckabee did seize on these developments today. This was a planned Huckabee event that extended to Ms. Davis and her lawyer. The fact of the matter is that besides he and Senator Ted Cruz, most of the other presidential candidates have opted out of making a bigger deal out of this. They probably wish it would go away. But it is an issue I'm going to be raising with Ohio Governor Kasich, who'll be joining me later in this broadcast because it has become one of those issues that galvanizes the religious right of this party. Another issue that galvanizes this party, far apart from religion, is this Iran deal. Former Vice President Dick Cheney lambasting it today, is saying that we have essentially caved to the Iranians, and worse, we have all but guaranteed our own defeat at the hands of the Iranians down the road. And in other words, they could attack us, and it is almost embedded into this agreement, an agreement that now looks more and more likely to pass. I say pass with quotation marks because it will be overwhelmingly rejected in the House and the Senate. But as you know by now, with 41 clear yes votes on the part of Democrats, it will avoid any attempt to override an expected presidential veto. The former U.S. spokesman to the United Nations, Rick Grinnell, on all of that. We're going to get into a little bit more of what the former vice president had to say. But is it too little too late, Rick?
Yeah, it's failure theater. I mean, look, we already know that the president of the United States is the one who's in charge of foreign policy. Elections have consequences. We don't always love that, but Republicans need to be very careful that we're not trying to take away power from the president because we may find ourselves in the White House and are going to want to undo that. I think that it was wrong to make this deal not a treaty. Senator Corker and other senators should have fought hard to make it a treaty. But there is one benefit to the fact that since it's not a treaty, and we probably would have been able to stop it if it was classified that way, but since it's not, the next president of the United States could come in and dissolve the whole deal and go back to the Security Council and try to get international sanctions and pressure back on the Iranians.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from. What would that do then? And obviously, the leadership to be in the House and the Senate, the Republican leadership, obviously accepted this, went along with this for whatever reasons. I don't know. You're closer to that than I'll ever be. But it is what it is. Now I'm wondering, and I think the vice president has indicated this as fast as the former vice president, that a new president could come in and tear this up, but it's a moot point, right? Because all these other countries have gone along.
Well, we have to start over for sure. And so it is a moot point in that we're not going to be able to snap sanctions back on. That's a ridiculous idea. We are going to be able to go back, though, and convince the Security Council, or I should say try to convince the Security Council, that the Iranians are not complying. The one thing that is for sure, the Iranians will not comply. We have seen since 2006 multiple pages, hundreds of questions, Neil, that the Iranians have refused to tell the IAEA. Remember, the IAEA are inspectors. If there's a violation, they write a report. They don't throw up their hands. They're not carrying guns. They're not pushing their way in. They go back to their office and they write a report, and that report goes back to the UN. So all of that can be manipulated if we have a powerful U.S. ambassador to the UN to make the case that the Iranians are not doing the deal that they said that they would, and that we then could start back with international sanctions. Make no mistake. We will not get into Parchin and a whole bunch of other sites like the Obama-Kerry deal is telling us that we will. There is no way the Iranians are letting us in. They wouldn't do it with sanctions. They're certainly not going to do it without sanctions.
Amazing. Rick Grinnell, thank you very, very much. Also want to let you know what was going on, as Shep touched on, the corner of Wall and Broad today. A big rally. In fact, a good way to start off what has been a pretty sloppy post-Labor Day market here. We had been down on the month, still are down on the month, but 390 points of that coming today. A lot of deals that were being made today, about $45 billion worth of them, another $10 billion in companies buying back their own stock. But as you can tell, looking at the Dow 30, virtually all the key components were up, including today IBM. Warren Buffett indicating that he's buying more IBM. In fact, he was big on this issue when it was down a few weeks back and has been bigger still. But, of course, this is a broad-based rally that produced better than 2% returns across all the major markets, Apple included among those, with some big announcements due out tomorrow. We're told a new iPhone, told an iPad. Who knows with this company? Everyone gets way ahead of themselves. They have to get a life, but it is what it is. All right, to Fox Business Network's Charles Payne, the host of Making Money, on what he makes of this big old bounce back. As you always have educated and reminded me, Charles, markets bounce back, then bounce down. We have triple-digit moves commonplace.
Commonplace these days. You know, it was ironic, though, up until 3 weeks ago, this was the narrowest trading range in history. It was really a dull, boring market, and all of a sudden, all you-know-what broke out.
Right.
And, you know, a lot of it has to do with China. A lot of it has to do with the global economy. A lot of it has to do with big question marks here. We don't really know what's going on with this economy. Think about that jobs report on Friday. 140,000 private sector jobs. That is so anemic. That is so heartbreaking almost, you know, from our perspective, from all the jobs we lost, considering how many were part-time. It was just an abysmal number. So all of those question marks finally took a toll on the stock market. I think what we saw today on Wall Street, they like to talk about the real guys, the big guys, you know, the real movers and shakers, guys who manage $50, $100 billion. They're in the Hamptons. They're away. They don't even play the market in August. But they were back today. A lot of people were back today. And we got a pretty good rebound.
Leon Cooperman, who you know very well, had him on your show and grilled him senselessly, which I found was rude of you. But anyway, he's a very successful market icon. He says the bull market's not over. It's alive and well. You had Warren Buffett today telling on Liz Claiborne, you know, I still believe the underpinnings are just fine. He was buying IBM stock today. You and I remember after the 87 crash or the 89 crash chat or whatever you want to call it, when there are downdrafts and guys like that step forward to say everything's okay, in fact, I'm buying, and then you see a lot of companies buy back their own stock believing that they were undervalued, and deals ensue as well. That's a good underpinning.
This is not that is a good underpinning. The market isn't not at levels where it imploded before. From any traditional valuation metrics to any sort of enthusiasm, there's absolutely zero enthusiasm, in fact, when it comes to the stock market. People are either neutral, bearish, very few who are you know, you don't get in a cab and someone's trading the market between fares. Having said that, I remember 87. That was my first big test, learning about the market. I was a broker.
In other words, everyone becomes an expert. Everyone's into it.
Well, everyone's into it, but that's not what's going on. But at the top, that's what happened. In 87, when we were down at the open, to the point where I was like, oh, my goodness, I wanted this to be my career. I thought it was over. I went out to the bar, Neil. I'm almost ashamed to say it. I walked out the bar at around 4:20. One of the guys from my office is walking by. I said, how bad was it? He told me. I almost went back in. I went upstairs, started calling clients, and it ended up being one of the best buying moments of my entire career. Yeah, but I didn't know then. I was young.
See,
I was frustrated. I was afraid.
I went to a bakery and just loaded up on ring-dings. So there are other ways to hide your vices. But real quickly, today and everything else, I mean, September, as you remind me, is actually the worst month of them all. October gets the headlines. How do you think it's going to play out? Much depends on China. I guess they're instituting circuit breakers to control this.
Well, the big speculation in China. Last night, the numbers came out. Their exports were down horrendously. Imports are down tremendously. So here's the thing. Everyone's expecting China to put some money to work. They have $4 trillion in foreign reserve. That's other people's money sitting in their bank. So unlike us, even though we finger point at China, they do have assets. You know, we just print money out of thin air. They might do something really big. We saw a Caterpillar.
The market was up this morning on the notion they will.
Right, absolutely. You're right. You're right.
Do you buy that it will?
I think they will. I think China's dealing with this delicate balance, but once you take people off of bicycles and put them in cars, you can never put them back in a bicycle. I don't care if you're a communist hardliner or not.
That is very well put. Charles Payne, less than about an hour and 45 minutes from now, I don't think he'll be going to a bar on the way to the show.
You never know.
You actually never know. Thank you, buddy, very much. Charles Payne. All right, well, Hillary Clinton is rebooting her image. She thinks that the world seems to think she's too serious. But the world has known her for decades now. Is it too late to try the humor thing? And then Donald Trump, he's in another fight, this one with Club for Growth. They've exchanged some nasty tweets. So we're going to talk to the head of Club for Growth on whether this is going a little too far and whether the Donald might be misrepresenting this. Who knows after this?